The hardest part of any college essay, as well as the most important part of any college essay, is finding some interesting bit of thought, some moment where the reader says, wow, I never would have thought of it that way, or I've never even considered something like that, or I would never have looked at it that way. The reader says that, you're in a good position. One of the ways that we do that is an exercise where we try to find similarities between two totally unrelated things, or to find differences between two very similar things. In the process of finding those differences, you're going to come across something interesting, and your college essay will be about something that's interesting. I'm going to give you a couple examples here. We're first going to use two different things. We're going to start off with dogs and math. Dogs and math, they don't really seem to have anything to do with each other. If I was going to start to list things that they both have in common, I mean, they both have something to do with people. Dogs are tame animals. That's kind of interesting, I guess. You might argue that math is a form of taming nature, and that's kind of cool. That might be something to go with. So I might actually, let me go ahead and actually write that down. Tame. We might also indicate how both can be a measure of extreme comfort and wealth. So for example, people who live in countries where there's a shortage of food will either not have dogs, or they'll have dogs to show their wealth. My family came from India. This is actually very common in India. If you can show that you can even feed a dog while other people can't feed themselves or their kids, it's a way to really show how much wealth you have. Similarly, if you're studying math, it means that you're not struggling for survival. You don't need to spend your time hunting and gathering and farming. You can actually spend time on these other things. So you can talk about something like privilege or wealth or something like that. And that could be an interesting idea for a college essay. These things that we can explore once our basic needs have been met. And we could go on there forever, but I'm going to just go ahead and just pick one of these, and let's go with the first one. And the idea is that both of these things come from taming something. A dog is basically their tame version of a wild dog or a tame version of a wolf. And so the process of taming the dogs has caused them to have many different species, has caused them to really develop as a whole thing. The taming hasn't just smashed wolves down into nothing. This has actually led to a whole new exploration. And the same thing you can say with math. The argument might be that when we tame nature with math, we end up missing a lot of nature. But the other fact is that we actually end up creating something totally new. Totally new explorations of different types of math, some of which don't even have a correlate to nature. There are many dogs that exist now that are in no way similar to any wild dog or any wolf, that have a whole different set of abilities, skills, uses, and all that kind of stuff. So we can talk about the idea. So the essay wouldn't be about dogs and math. You wouldn't say like, hey, let's talk about dogs and math. You might somehow bring in a story about taming something or not wanting to tame something, and how the exploration of taming something actually leads to a huge branching out and kind of speciation of ideas. And you can start that in various different ways. We'll get to all that in a bit, but right now I just want you to see that by comparing dogs and math, we don't get an essay about dogs and math. That might just be silly, but we do get an essay, an idea to write about, which is the idea of taming. That's an interesting idea that can be applied to so many things. An essay about taming could be an interesting essay. I don't think I've ever seen a college essay about that subject, so yours is probably going to stand out. By the way, before you even think about it, I've seen about 9 million essays about doing community service in a third world country. That's not going to stand out. An essay about taming, if you do it right, could definitely stand out. So that's an example of two very different things leading us to the idea of taming. Now, you might not mention dogs or math in your essay at all, or you might mention both of them. The point of the essay, though, is not dogs and math. The point of the essay is taming. Now, if I wanted to take this to the next level, I might try to apply the idea of taming to some new thing that's totally unrelated. Or something like music, totally different. And maybe one might talk about how how music, we can look at music as like the taming of natural sounds, and how, that's so, and how that's like so important to your whatever experience, and how that leads to a whole branching out of different things in music. All right. So the idea again is the essay is about taming, not about dogs and math. It's a tricky thing to do, but again, getting into a top tier Ivy League college, if it was easy, everyone would do it. And a big part of it is showing this very unusual, unforgettable type of thinking. If they see an essay about taming and 55,000 essays about, doing community service in a third world country, I promise you the taming one's going to stand out. That's the unforgettable one. You want your essay to be unforgettable. Now, let's talk about the other side of things, where you pick two similar things and look for differences. Now, the mistake that a lot of people make is they look for two similar things and find the similarities, and then that's just stupid because, yeah, anyone can see the similarities between physics and math. They both have a bunch of math. They're both hard to do. They're both important in science, blah, blah, blah. Let's talk about the differences between physics and math, the ways that physics and math are actually very different. If you've taken a physics class, how do we always represent masses in physics? Usually as a point. Physics is, in its nature, about approximations, about ignoring the obvious external details so we can look at these underlying principles. For example, one of the most important results in physics was the idea that all things fall at the same rate. That even though it seems that heavy things should fall faster than light things, in a vacuum, they all fall at the same rate. So we ignore all these details, shape and mass and all that, and we see that they all fall at the same rate. That's an interesting idea, that it's about these approximations. Math usually is not about approximations. It's not about ignoring the things, but in fact, it's often exploring the details. So one of the differences could be the idea of approximations. An essay about approximations could be cool. What are some of the other differences between physics and math? Physics is usually, arguably, has a reputation of being more applied. Although in reality, a lot of the advanced physics that goes on is highly theoretical. Math has the reverse. It has advanced math has a reputation of not being applied. But these days, things like number theory are applied to cryptography, to cryptocurrency, all that. It might be tricky to do that, but I could do something. You can make an essay about how math, let me actually be more specific. Abstract math, applied, and theoretical physics, not necessarily. Now, it wouldn't be about math and physics. You would talk about things that you don't expect to be applied being applied. It could be kind of cool, if it's done right, or just done well. There's a million right ways to do it. I don't want to give you guys the idea at all that there's one right way to do a college essay. There's infinity right ways to do a college essay. So let's say I was going to do a worksheet. If I was going to do an essay, maybe let's do the first one, approximations. Now, writing an essay about approximations could be interesting because the idea of approximations can be applied to pretty much anything. I'm going to go ahead and apply approximations to something totally random. Let's say the American Revolution. It's not really a thing that we usually think about as having approximations, so I'll think about it for a second. So how can we apply approximations to history? Well, now that I'm starting to think about it, I'm realizing that a lot of times history, it's not, you don't show every single event moment to moment. We summarize, we create approximations. We sometimes sugarcoat our heroes to make them seem larger than life. We actually make the events seem more epic and grandiose rather than just kind of pointless and brutal and silly than they actually were. Now, on the surface, that might seem negative, but obviously to be even more against the norm, I'm going to talk about how those approximations, which are seen as so negative usually, are actually the beautiful part of history. I'm going to argue that approximations let us take the mundane brutality of actual history and make kind of a cultural mythology that teaches us lessons of conscience, that teaches us how to behave. I'm going to argue that while people might say that this idealized version, that maybe George Washington as a person wasn't perfect the way most people are. The idealized version of him is great because it gives us this ideal to strive for. We don't just say that we're going to be settled for the actual George Washington. We're going to try to achieve the idea of him, something like that. I mean, we could go in so many different directions, but again, the idea of approximations, it's an interesting idea. Now, of course, for an essay, for an actual personal statement, you'd have to have, personal elements in it. You'd have to make sure that there's a story and a narrative and all that. But the hardest part is this, coming up with something like an interesting theme to focus around. And for the first essay, the theme was taming things. And for the second essay, the theme was approximations. And a theme can be woven in and out of your essay, even though your essay itself is going to be predominantly, of course, a personal narrative. I know it's hard to think about. It's hard for anyone to think about. Every single Bohr Method student ever has found it hard to think about this stuff. But the good news for you guys is that it was always hard for them, but they figured it out. And so many of them have gone to Harvard and Yale and Princeton and other Ivy League colleges. It's a hard method, but that's the advantage because no one else knows how to do this stuff. You're going to be one of a tiny, tiny, tiny fraction of people who's ever even heard of this type of thinking, let alone actually done it. If you can be one of the few people that can actually do it and you actually do it on your essay, it's going to make your essay stand out amazingly. It's so important to be forgiving with yourself. Don't say that you need to do this in 5 seconds. I promise you this. You say you need to finish this in an hour, it's going to take you 50 years. Give yourself whatever time you need. Take your time and even just by being in this session, you're miles ahead of anyone. Anyway, go back and start to play with some of the ideas you have on this worksheet. This worksheet is one of the hardest worksheets, not just in the college essay program, but in the entire Bohr Method curriculum. Give yourself time and you'll be able to do it.